Hello, I'm Jen. Today I'll be showing you my walkthrough process on how to render hair. This is an OC character I've used in my last video on how to render eyes. If you're interested in seeing my process on that, I will link the video to that in the description. For those who don't know me, I've been a digital artist now for almost 5 years, and I mainly post my art on Instagram and Blue Sky. My socials will also be linked down below if you'd like to check out and support more of my work. Now onto the video. Regarding how I personally render hair, the line art actually plays a pretty big part in my process. So let me explain a little how I do it since I have it done here already. Usually I'll have the typical hair shape and strands done, and by strands I mean sections. I don't really like to do each individual strand of hair, for many reasons, including it's just too much to render. So instead I'll have these big chunks of hair sectioned out and get the main shapes of the curls, the waves, the bangs, however I want the hair shape to be. And what I'll do is make the brush size a bit thinner, and then I'll go in with a little more detail with the strands and add in more sections into the hair so it'll look something like this. And here I separated both of these layers so that you guys can see more clearly what I mean. Now this will make it sort of like an easy color and guide to render the hair. I'm going to use the base color of the hair. You don't have to since the colors are always up to the artist. But then I'm going to make a new layer clipped to the base hair color and set the blending mode to multiply. Then I'm going to switch to an airbrush tool. And with that, I'll lightly brush the ends or bottom half of the hair. It'll depend on the length. And I also want to brush the very top of the hair. And lastly, very sparingly around the face for the head's shadow. You could go ahead and blend that in a bit too. Next, I'm going to clip a new layer, blending mode set to add this time. And just like before, I'm going to lightly brush, this time between the spots I didn't color in. And it'll sort of act like a highlighted shine on the hair. You also want to add a thin halo shape at the top of the head, since light tends to reflect off the more curvy or wavy parts of the hair, including just where the hair is growing out from. I like to erase just some bits out of the halo part to give it the illusion of more shapes of hair strands. Then I can lightly blend them in again. I'll be using the fill tool next, so to make it easier, I'm going to hide those two layers I just made just temporarily before I make a new multiply layer, clip it, then find a shade that's very similar to the base color of the hair, but just a bit darker. And what I'm going to do is fill in some sections of hair. Keep in mind, I'm not filling in each section that is directly next to another. I want to fill in obvious strands that are going to be darker in the shadows. Sort of like you're making a candy cane stripe pattern. But again, I don't want to have two colored stripes together. In fact, every few strands you could skip. It doesn't have to be filled in, and you'll see why when this layer is finished. There might be some sections that look like it should have been filled in too, but you otherwise didn't because it would have been next to another stripe already filled in. That's why with a new multiply layer, you're going to slightly change your color to a lighter tone, and then you could go in and fill in the other sections that you haven't filled or think belongs in a less harsher shadow. Remember that not all of the sections in the hair need to be filled in with these stripes. It'll mostly depend on how your hair and line art looks, but most of the time not all of the sections will be filled in. Very occasionally you might even need a third multiply layer with a lighter toned color than the last, and you can fill in sections you think still needed a dark stripe. I thought I might have needed it in this little part behind the ear, but decided otherwise not to keep it. Now on a new layer, blending mode set to add, this will be the highlights going along the edges of the hair. Again, you could stay using the base color of the hair, but you want to make sure whatever color you're using, it's not too light that the highlights are just pure white. You're also not going to basically outline every single section either. You can do some strand sections, but it'll mostly be on the outer sections, closer to the edges, the top of the hair, and lastly the bangs. And you can do this however way is easier for you, whether you'll draw them in manually or use the curved line tool. Sometimes I usually use and do a mix of both. It should look something like this. I'm going to then duplicate that layer and Gaussian blur it either between 40 to 50%. Now would be the time where I'd color in the line art of the hair, in this case a dark burgundy color. Now we are almost done. I'm going to go back and make a new clipped layer with the blending mode set to add glow. And I like to use a square or rectangle shaped brush for this. You can use whatever you want or the same brush that we've been using before, but now I'll draw in these thick streaks of highlights going across the hair, like this. You can even play with the shape if you like. You'll see that I'm also using a similar color to what I've used for those outlining highlights. And what you see now is I'm using a soft eraser tool with faded tips turned on for both ends, and I'm basically taking these rounded chunks out of the highlights, and you want to sort of stagger the pattern of which you're erasing the chunks out of. So some strokes could be longer or shorter, rounder or sharper, and so on. And this will give it another illusion of more singular strands in the hair in a more simplistic sort of way. You can then lightly blend out any edges that seem too rough or you want less attention on. Sometimes I'll repeat this step with a more pop color if I feel like it looks a little too dull. Next, this part is also optional, but on a new layer set to add glow, you can use any color you want for this, and go ahead and brush around the edges of the head to give that rim light effect. And again, it could be any color and come from any direction you want, as it'll depend on your light source. You can blend and erase to get the desired shapes that you want for this light. And sometimes if you're working with darker hair, you could go ahead and duplicate this layer of rim light and clip it over your line art for the hair. I personally didn't want a bold rim light for this piece, so I simply turned the opacity down a bit to my liking. Lastly, I like to clip a new add layer, and with the same color as the character's skin, I'm going to lightly airbrush that color onto the bangs so they have that translucent effect. And you could do the same to the ends of the hair too. Now that you are officially done rendering the hair, you could go and do whatever other special effects you'd like with it. You can clip on an overlay layer and do different undertones or completely change the color of the hair if you're not really feeling that color anymore. And like you can see me doing here, you don't have to do it manually either. With an overlay layer, you can also just change the colors through the hue, brightness, and saturation filter sliders in settings. And really just have fun with it. The hard part is already done, the hair is fully rendered, and you're free to add any other special effects that you'd like. I want to say, compared to my last video on rendering eyes, I said eyes were the easiest part of a character to render, possibly the fastest, and although rendering hair can be pretty tricky or tedious, I want to say it's probably my favorite part to render overall, because I just love to play with the colors and see how well it turned out in the end. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my walkthrough process in this video. I hope I've at least helped those who are looking to better improve their art skills and find that this video has helped you well. If you have any more suggestions on what you'd like to know how to render, please leave a comment down below and leave a like on this video. Again, my previous walkthroughs will be linked in the description below as well as my socials. That's all for now. Thanks for watching!